Hello, young scholars, champions of democracy, warriors of the republic. This is our flip classroom on civil liberties. And in this video, we're going to take a look at free speech in schools. And this is always a fun topic. Again, some of the topics, some of the cases will be on the AP exam. Some of these are other supplemental cases that you will need to provide background or some sort of justification. So the first case we're going to look at, and we are going to spend time in class, is Tinker v. Des Moines. It's one of my favorite cases. We're actually coming up on the 50th anniversary of this case. It's 1969, so automatically the context clues should tell us that this is the Warren Court. So arguably, there's probably going to be an expansion of civil rights and liberties here. So Mary Beth Tinker was wearing the black armband as seen in the photograph, and she was suspended for wearing a black armband protesting the Vietnam War. Her parents, with the help of organizations, sued, and the Supreme Court ruled that students' rights do not stop at the schoolhouse door, that you are entitled to the same rights as everyone else. Now, as you and I know, there has been a dramatic scaling back of those rights, and we're going to take a look. But Tinker v. Des Moines was one of the early free speech cases with students and the law. So the next case we're going to take a look at is Bethel v. Frazier in 1986. So again, context clues. 1986, this is the conservative Rehnquist Court, not the liberal Warren Court or the activist Berger Court. So the issue here is students who make inappropriate speech before the student body, and they are suspended. So is that speech protected by the First Amendment? And the decision of the court was that the school did not violate the student's First Amendment's rights, that the school administration can prohibit speech that is vulgar or lewd. All right, and the standard you're going to hear our school administration say is if it disrupts the learning environment of the students. So again, we're beginning to see kind of a scaling back of students' rights. All right, another case, Hazelwood v. Lemire in 1988. Again, it's the conservative court, and the issue here is articles that were printed in a school newspaper about divorce and teen pregnancy were censored by the school administration. Does the school administration have the right to censor things published in a yearbook or school newspaper? And then again, the Supreme Court said that the school did not violate the First Amendment, that the school administration may regulate school-sponsored student speech. All right. So whereas in the real world, outside of the school walls, the government cannot, because of what's known as prior restraint, which we talked about in the previous video. However, in the school world, yes, school administration can prohibit and block student speech. Bong hits for Jesus, and always a fun case for students. All right, Morris v. Frederic, 2007. So this is not that long ago. Students were seeking attention as the Olympic torch ran through their neighborhood. This was decided 5-4. The students held up a sign, said "Bong hits for Jesus," and they were on TV. Now, as you notice from the photograph, students are holding up a banner. They're holding it outside of someone's home. They're holding it outside on presumably private property. How are these students getting in trouble? Well, the Supreme Court ruled that it was reasonable to suspend students who promote illegal activities like drug use, even if it may be outside of school hours, because it may have a substantial impact, again, on the learning environment of students once they come into school. So again, this is where it comes into play. You may know someone who's been disciplined for things that have happened outside of school. And the reason is, well, they can do that under the Morris v. Frederic decision in 2007. All right, another case in 2009, Palmer v. Waxen. The student wears a T-shirt with a printed message that violates the student dress code. This is something that you may see a lot of your not a lot of your friends, but you may see or hear about or question about. I know several years ago, students wore the bracelets when that was popular. It said "I heart boobs," and that's a quote from the bracelet. It was supporting breast cancer awareness. But again, the bracelet, it's argued that it violated the dress code and the policies, and the school, as long as it's not disrupting the learning environment, you are entitled to wear it. But the minute that what you're wearing becomes a disruption to the school's learning environment, then the school district, the school administration may take action. The Supreme Court denied the appeal in this case in 2009. All right, what about fighting words? Okay, can the government prevent words that might cause a fight or a breach of peace? All right, so in this case, in 1942, Koplinski v. New Hampshire, a Jehovah's Witness was distributing handouts, and a police officer approached him and called him a damn racketeer, and he was arrested. And the court unanimously upheld his conviction, and the states had the right to prevent such provocative speech. So you can't go around threatening people or saying you're going to shoot them or hit them or hurt them, because those are fighting words, and fighting words are not protected by the First Amendment. All right, what about libel and slander? Again, we talked a little bit about this in class, but libel refers to false statements that defame someone. It's very difficult to prove liable because, again, you have to, if someone genuinely believes what they're saying is true, then it's not liable. You have to prove that they knowingly and willingly know that what they are printing or saying is false. So the New York Times in 1964 charged that a police officer in Alabama had abused African Americans. The police commissioner Sullivan sued the New York Times, and the New York Times ruled unanimously, overturned Alabama's verdict, and said that if a newspaper prints an article and it turns out to be false, but they thought it was true at the time, it's not committed libel. And sometimes a newspaper will print a retraction to a story, but libel and slander are very difficult to prove. That's why we've seen these tabloid magazines that run pretty sensational stories, and lawsuits against them are not usually successful. All right, what about commercial speech? Okay, the definition of commercial speech is communication in the form of advertising. Generally, it is the most restricted and regulated form of speech, and it's usually done by the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. All right. For example, there's regulation of the public airways. So, for example, in I forget what year it was, but one of the Super Bowls, when there were some inappropriate appearances made by Justin Timberlake and Janet Jackson, the NFL was censored, and they had to pay a couple $1 million. You can't say certain words. You can't drop an F-bomb on 3, 6, or 10, or other channels for that network. It has to be blocked. So there is some decency there. So broadcast stations must follow what's known as the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission's rules. Sometimes those rules are stricter, sometimes they are lesser. That's why channels like HBO and Showtime and Netflix, because they're not subjected to the same regulation, because they're not necessarily public. You have to pay extra for them. So if you're paying for them extra, you know that some of the programming is going to be lewd or explicit. For example, regulation must be narrowly tailored to promote a compelling governmental interest. And this is a key phrase that you want to put down somewhere in your notes, because you're going to hear this time and time again. And this is a phrase that when you're writing your FRQ, you would be wise to incorporate it somewhere in there. The phrase compelling governmental interest. There must be a compelling governmental interest for the government to act on a variety of topics. All All right, next big case we're going to talk about. This is freedom of the press. And does the government have the right to, does the media have the right to print something even if it's harmful to the United States? And we know clearly that this is one of the big things that the founding fathers advocated. And the case here is the New York Times v. the United States. This is one of the required cases by the College Board, so we're going to spend some time with this in class. This is the premise of the hit film, The Post. So 1971, Daniel Ellsberg is a contractor for the Pentagon. He takes a report that was commissioned by the Pentagon, which is a survey of the study of Vietnam. The papers are commissioned in the early 1950s through the Kennedy administration, the Johnson administration, and a little bit of the Nixon administration. And he illegally gives them to the New York Times and the Washington Post. And they both publish excerpts. The Nixon administration called for an injunction, a restraining order, and said that this violates the national security, that this is a threat. And in the movie, it goes a little bit into this, but the court in New York gave one ruling, the court in Virginia gave another ruling. So with two conflicting rulings, it was headed for the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that the government cannot, because of, again, prior restraint, they cannot block the publication of these documents. All right. An additional free press. The significance of U.S. v. Nixon, 6-3. Government can almost never use prior restraint. Okay, and this is a huge protection. For example, we talked a little bit about it when Robert Snowden, leaked classified materials, and other news organizations printed it and put it out there. It's very hard for the government to control news, as we have so many media outlets that once it's out, it's once the toothpaste is out of the tube, it's very hard to contain and control it. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about religious freedom, but that's going to be the topic for video number 3.